Hi there, Shad. My name is Zach, and amongst other things, I'm a reenactor and a jouster, but I'm also a massive nerd and love playing tabletop war games and D&D. So when I saw your video about how much gear an adventurer could carry, it was an auto click for me. So thank you for that. Thank you for putting the time in to make that. It got me thinking that very often we really focus on the weaponry that we would carry. Obviously, in yours you loaded up with an awful lot of weaponry, but as an adventurer you'd also need to carry a lot of other things and think about things beyond just who you're fighting next. So that made me think that actually, as an adventurer, you probably would need some kind of beast of burden. So in low fantasy, we're probably talking about a horse. If we're thinking about some other world, then maybe a different type of animal. But I'm thinking horses at the moment. And then that got me thinking, if I was going on an adventure, what weapons would I take? And how would I store it? You see, you got the obvious ones, the sword and the dagger, both very useful. They're useful in all sorts of situations, whether cramped or you can extend your reach with a sword by using it further out and changing your guard. But what about from something that maybe wasn't a duel, but you still needed a weapon? Something like hunting. Hunting would be a massively important part of an adventurer's life out in the wilds. Finding some kind of food would be very, very important, especially in the months where you're not expecting to find nuts or berries in the hedgerows. So something like a bow or a crossbow would be incredibly important to keeping the adventure going. My particular preference would be for a sling bow. Sling bows are basically crossbows that instead of shooting a bolt, fire a stone. And the reason why I'd choose one of them as an adventurer would be so that I could find replacement ammunition basically anywhere. That sort of thing would be really, really important to me because making new arrows would be very difficult. We've all been in situations, if we've done archery before, where the arrow is headed off into the undergrowth and it's ended up buried somewhere and we've never found it again. Another thing that we might have problems with arrows would be them breaking. You know, if we miss and hit a rock, or in fantasy worlds you've got all sorts of fantastical creatures with super hard skins. So an arrow is not always something that you can pick back up once you've shot it. So a sling bow would be my ranged weapon of choice. And what I'd probably do is that sling bow would be on the back of my horse. It would be packed onto the saddlebags, and I would get it out when I absolutely needed it. Second thing that I would definitely have on my horse would be a hatchet. Now, yes, a hatchet would have some of the combat properties of a mace. It wouldn't be as good as a warhammer, but it is so useful when you're out in the wild. A hatchet would allow you to build camp. It would allow you to make a fire. And, you know, you could do those sorts of things with a sword and a knife, but an axe is so much more useful for that. So that, I think, is something that you would definitely need in your armory as an adventurer. Probably not all the time, probably more useful when setting camp than actually in combat, because the shorter an axe is, the less useful it is in combat. So that would go on the horse as another tool rather than a real weapon. Finally, I would take a boar spear. Now, this is something that I'd probably carry in my hand, and the reason I'd choose a boar spear over some other polearm is that I just think it's so much more useful than something like a poleaxe. Yes, a poleaxe or a halberd is incredibly useful against plate armored opponents, but the chances of finding them would be relatively rare, I would say, depending on the fantasy world we're talking about. But one thing that constantly crops up in fantasy is enemies with extreme endurance. Things like orcs are supposed to be able to take loads of hits before they go down. And even things that we find in our world, like boars, wild boars, can take an awful lot of punishment. And that's why the boar spear was developed. If you don't know what a boar spear is, it is a standard spear, but it has prongs coming out at the side of the head, and it was used to skewer a pig, and the prongs would then hold the pig roughly 6 feet away from you. You know, the length of the spear. You see, they had a problem when hunting of sometimes boars, when enraged, could, after being hit, could run up the length of the spear and still attack and gore the hunter before they went down. This kind of thing, I think, would be really useful as an adventurer. Out in the wilds, things like wild boar would be incredibly dangerous. Even things like stags can do an awful lot of damage, and keeping something at arm's length, even once you've stabbed it, is an extremely useful thing to be able to do, both in dungeoneering and just in general survival out in the wilds. I hope this has been interesting to you. I wonder if anyone out there has got some suggestions of other weapons that would be incredibly useful to an adventurer, that would be a must-have on the carry. Would you carry it on your person, like the spear or the sword, or would you put it on the back of your horse for occasional use? Do leave a comment down below. It would be great to hear from you. Thank you very much for coming. If you liked this, I'm doing more videos like this, including a new series on me purchasing a whole new harness of armor. So subscribe to find out more about that. Do leave a like. If you didn't like it, leave me a comment please, because I'd love to make these videos better. Thanks very much, and I'll see you soon.